Hey guys, welcome to my Game of Thrones lighting and post-production tutorial. So this is an image that I shot a few weeks ago, and it's actually a composite made up of the background, the smoke, the throne, and the king. So I combined them all together using Photoshop and a little bit of Lightroom. So let's just break down the lighting that I used for this. So basically what the lighting itself is very simple. I wanted to create a moody look to the shot. So what I had was two large softboxes, and rather than facing the models square on, I had them adjacent to the models. And the reason I do this is it gives a much softer feather to the lighting. So if we have a look at the diagram, you can see that basically I've got my backlight, which creates a bit of separation from the background. And then the way I position my softboxes is actually adjacent to the model. So the majority of the light is not even hitting the model, and what you get is a feather action where the light part of the light skims off the side of the model and off the side of the softbox and onto the model, and it's a much softer look to the light, and it sort of I believe it most closely replicates daylight. So very, very simple setup using the two large softboxes and one hard light with a grid spot in the background just to give a bit of separation. On the day, I was working very closely with several publicists, and then of course we had the talent, the stylists, makeup artists, and various other people running around on set. So it's a lot of people to deal with, a lot going on. My main concern on the day was to make sure that the lighting remained consistent throughout the whole shoot. Also, I made sure that my camera was locked down and marked off, and that I didn't change the focal length at all, because that's really crucial when you're doing composites, and it just makes life so much easier if you know that each of the shots are to scale, each of the people are to scale. It makes it much easier to comp the whole thing together. So this is an example of the final group shot that I did, but I don't think it's nearly as interesting as the shot of the king sitting on the throne, and that's the one I want to talk about with you guys today. To create this shot, the first thing I needed to do was find a way to replicate the throne. Now, this throne is probably one of the most iconic thrones in TV history, so it wasn't something I could skimp on. So in the end, we decided to find a craftsman who forged this throne for us out of steel, and we got the colors right. It was a very, very expensive exercise, and yeah, so I kind of made that last bit up. So this is television, where we work with props and basically try and find cheaper ways to do things that often involve some sticks and tape and lots of glittery paint. So basically what we did to create the throne was use a model throne, $20 model throne. It's still cast iron. It's about the size of, it fits into the palm of my hand. So it's actually sitting here on a laptop holder so you can get a sense of the size of it. So basically I worked out my angle and shot at made sure that the camera was at a similar angle, and then what I did was I got my talent to sit on a very special throne, not quite as sexy as the throne from Game of Thrones. It's actually an office chair Jan from accounts lent us. It doesn't have a back, but it was the perfect size. And the great thing about these chairs is they're adjustable, so we actually lowered it so that it was at an acceptable height for a throne. And then basically we shot everything separately, and then I merged it all together using Photoshop, which I'll show you next. Before I go into Photoshop, I just wanted to quickly show you how we got the smoke background for this shot. So I could have easily have maybe used the smoke in camera and had it going on set, but it just makes it difficult when you've got a lot of people in a room and the smoke machine going. You've got to keep stopping to clear the smoke. It's hard to focus, and it's hard to get the smoke looking exactly how you want it to look. So basically what we did at the end of the day is we got the smoke machine, and I got this from the props guys at the network. This is one of those old school movie smoke machines. You've got the liquid that's piped into the machine and it blows the smoke out. I'm sorry for the lack of technical expertise that I've shared with you there. But basically, the best way to get smoke as a background is to have a black background. So obviously the smoke has something to stand out against, and then there needs to be a backlight. So I've just used my large octabox as a backlight for that, and basically the smoke is only backlit, so you can see I've got my two softboxes there in the shot. They're actually not on. It's only the backlight that's lighting the smoke. So basically the machine comes on, and you will get varying degrees of thickness. If you want to get the smoke looking a lot softer, all I needed to do was wait in between frames and then give the machine another hit, and you get these really gorgeous looking wafts of smoke. So I ended up doing a whole series that I can use as stock for future shoots. So I've got the really thick looking smoke and beautiful wispy smoke, and this one I've actually adjusted. I've cranked the clarity right up and drop the highlights just so it stands out. So there's before, there's after, and there's like all sorts of I've never been so excited by smoke in my life. So there's a little wisp. So I'll get a lot of use out of these smoke plates in the future. Alright, so we're in Photoshop now, and I've got my three files open. So I've got my king, and I've got my model throne, and I've got my background selected. And so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to drag and drop my king onto my background. So I'm just selecting the move tool, and you can see that you can see the squares there around it that denote that that's now been selected. And basically I'm just going to click down on my mouse, hold and drag and drop, and there he is. So if we look here in the layers palette, you can see that that's our background, and here's our king. And what I like to do, just to keep things all nice and tidy, is I like to name my layers so I'm not confused. And when this retouch is finished, I will save the layers as well, so that I can easily go back if someone makes a request in a few years' time that they want this shot but they want a completely different background. All right, so what I've just noticed is I've actually forgotten to get rid of the roller chair that he was sitting on. He was sitting on an old office chair that we could lower to the height of the throne, and so we haven't quite cut that out properly. So I'm actually going to get rid of that layer, go back to my original file, and I'm going to come in and remove this. The problem with this is that we've got black, black, black. It's going to be very difficult for, as good as Photoshop's auto masking is, to remove that in an automated kind of a way. So the simplest way to do this is to zoom in really close and select a tool like sometimes for this sort of stuff I like to use the magnetic lasso tool, or if I want more control I'll use the pen tool. And back in the day when I first started retouching, the pen tool, I used to blow up my images to about 500%, and I would just use the pen tool and go around and make my selection. I don't need to mask around, I just need to make sure that I'm getting in close to the main stuff that I want to remove. So I can go around there. Alright, so once I've made my selection with the pen tool, I then need to get my paths. Alright, so it's down here next to channels, and you can see there's a little drop down menu and make selection. I give it a feather of maybe 1, click OK, and now we've got that selection, and I can now just hit edit, clear, and it's gone. And if there's any places that I missed, I can just come back with maybe the eraser tool and just tidy that up. So there's a million different ways you can remove someone from a background or remove anything. So it's they're all good. It's just basically what works for you and what you feel more comfortable with. So like I can also try, so in the lasso we've got lasso, and that's just like freehand you can draw. Alright, and then the next one down under that, so basically I'm just right clicking on this icon here, and there's a drop down menu, and then there's a magnetic lasso, and what it does is it actually sticks to the edges, which is really cool. So this is a good way to trace around stuff if you want to, because it's just like sticking on to the edges. And again, I don't need to be that precise, and I actually don't know why I was up the top. So I'm going to now make my selection a little bit bigger. So once it's joined up like that, and I see what the problem is, I've got a feather set, so I'll just remove that, and we'll just start again. Let's get rid of that. So I don't need to go along that line, but I do need to be precise coming down here. So go around here, and I'm just... There we go. So once my selection is made, edit, clear. Alright, so got rid of that. Command D gets rid of it. So now he's nice and clean, and he's now floating on something. I could probably get rid of this here, but I might save it because yeah, that's actually the edge of his cape. So I thought that was the edge of the chair, so I don't need to do that. So all right, so once I've done that, I'm just going to hit the move tool and just drop and drag. There he is, and just kind of move him around until he looks like he's sitting down. So about there, kind of matches the angle that I had when I was shooting this in the studio. Alright, so the next thing I want to do is grab my throne. I'm just going to move my tools. I've got another monitor off to the side, so it just gives me more space to spread out. So again, I've got my move tool and I'm moving my crown. Alright, and I'm just going to position that, and what I need to do is I'm just going to kind of match where I think his butt should be. And then I'm going to hold down the shift key and grab onto one of these little corners of the transform box that's visible there. And the reason I hold down the shift key is if I don't, the transform goes all different ways, so it goes all askew. So I don't want that. I want to be precise. And shift it to scale so that the verticals remain constant and my horizontal width remains constant as I enlarge it. So I want to get the throne kind of, I think it's not quite big enough. It's sort of got to be, I think that's looking okay. So the problem is the throne is on top of the king, so if I show you my layers palette here, let's just name everything so we know what's what. So I've got my throne, I've got my king, and I've got my background. So what I want to do is make sure that the throne is under the king. So I'm just going to click on the layer so that it's highlighted and drag it underneath, and now we've got the king on top, and that is looking pretty good. He's not quite sitting where he should, and I think I just need to move him back a little bit as well. So he needs to be about there, and he's now nicely planted on the ground. So I just want to actually push the throne back a little bit. Bring the king up. There we go. So I just want to make sure that that looks like it's on the ground. And there we go. So it still kind of looks like it's floating, but that's where we can add shadows and things like that. The other thing I don't like is it doesn't feel wide enough to sit the king in. So I'm actually going to transform it, and I'm not going to hold the shift down, but I just want to make the throne a bit wider so that it just looks like a better scale. All right. About there, and I just want to also make it a little bit more squat. So before I go any further, I just want to check my Game of Thrones reference pic. So here it is here, and I can see that I think the throne just needs to be a bit wider and slightly probably, it's actually, the height is okay, the width isn't right. So I'll just make my throne a little bit wider. Okay, so I've got my crown, my throne selected. So, and again, I'm just going to make it a little bit wider so you can see more of the detail in there. And that's looking about right. Just needs to go, I think that's possibly just All right, so I'm happy with that. I'm happy with the height. I might just go a little bit higher. All right, that's pretty good. So I've got my layers in. I've got my background looking good. The next thing I want to do is add a bit of a mood to this shot. So what I'm going to do is bring up my actions. Okay, so I'm going to use my Dodge Burn, which you guys have in the Skin Retouch pack. So I'll add that layer onto the top. Actually, make sure that it's on the top. So I'll name it Dodge Burn. And I'm going to now grab a brush, a soft brush, make sure I've got my layer selected, and all right, about 1,000 pixels wide. And I'm going to make sure that I have, let me just put this over here so I can see what I'm doing. Black and white selected, and brushing in black is going to bring in shadow, and brushing in white is going to bring in highlight. So just bring my opacity right down and bring my flow right down because I want to build on that. So basically I just want to darken around the bottom, and I also want to darken the crown and around his feet. Like that. And the other thing I'm going to do is under the king, I just want to make sure that that's a bit darker in there. So it just helps sell that he's sitting. Alright, so already that's starting to look a lot better. Got a bit more mood in there. Darken that whole area around there. And then I just play with the opacity a bit. So before, after. All right, that's looking a bit better. Let's just add a bit of mood in there. The next thing I want to do is add smoke to the shot. So if you have a look at the image here, you can see that it's looking pretty sterile. So what I do is use some of the smoke from the plates that I created at the end of the shoot that I showed you guys earlier. So I've got my smoke selected here, and I'm actually going to place it over the king, in between the throne and the background, and all around. And so when you think about it, in these times, there would have been lots of this sort of atmosphere in the air. There would have been fires burning and dust all around the place. So this sort of helps sell the shot, I think, and give the right sort of atmosphere and make it not look as clinical. Okay, so I've got my smoke layer. The problem is that if I drag my smoke layer onto this image, the tones are very similar. So we've got like, it's basically a smoky coloured background, the concrete that I've chosen, and the smoke itself, it's not really going to stand out. Smoke to stand out needs a contrasting background colour. So this black backdrop that we've got here really brings out the beautiful texture of the smoke. So what I need to do first, before I drop my smoke in, is I need to make my background darker, and I think it's going to help really sell the mood of the shot. So to do that, what I've done is I've actually duplicated my background layer, and the reason I do that is just in case I make a mistake, I can go back and I'm not going to wreck my original file. So what I'm going to do is add a curves adjustment layer to that. So I've come down here to the adjustments palette, and I've chosen the curves there, and brings up a little dialog box here. So the curve can be manipulated in any way. We've got our highlights over this side and our shadows over this side. So if I was to bring my shadows up, I'm opening up the shadows, and because the adjustment layer is above the background, it's only going to affect the adjustments that I make are only going to affect my background. So I can open up my shadows if I wanted to on my background, which is not what I want to do. And I can do the same with my midtones, which I quite like. And I think the thing with curves is, like, I just push and pull things and have a look, and if it looks good, I go, well, that looks good, basically. So this is dealing with the midtones. So I'm going to drop the contrast in my midtones. That's starting to look really good, and that's it. I'm not going by numbers. I'm not saying, well, this technically, scientifically exact formula. I just push and pull things, very similar to how I would when I was drawing or working with clay. I just keep going until it looks good. And so up here, I've got my highlights, so I can also drop my highlights, but that tends to flatten it out a bit if I'm dropping the highlights in the midtone. So I don't like what that does, and I can also play with the highlights there, and not loving that. So I'm just going to keep going down here. Yeah, not loving that either. So just keep that. To me is still quite moody, and I really like what that's doing. And if I move my curve in this way, that's affecting it, and I don't like what that's doing. So I really like that this is like, it's kind of, it's grunging it up a little bit. So I love that. And a really neat little trick with the curves adjustment layer is I can go in colors, and I can just play with my blues. And if I want to, it's a good way to add tone. So I can add like a soft blue if I want to into the background, which makes it all look. It's a good way to tone your images if you want to. So that's quite good, but I'm not going to do that right now. We'll go back to where I was, and I think I'm liking that. Let's have a look. So that was before, and already you can see that we've brought out the texture. It's looking quite good. I think it's working. So I think now Now I can drop the smoke in. So I've got my smoke layer. I select my move tool and I'm going to drag it across. And so the next layer that goes on goes above the layer that I just selected. This kind of gets confusing. The best way to learn and understand layers is to basically just get Photoshop out, get yourself some basic photos, cut them out, put them on backgrounds, play around. My first comps weren't that fantastic, but I did learn a lot in the process. So that's what I encourage you all to do. So I've got my smoke here in the background, and I don't want it to be like, it's a shame that I had my background light in the shot, but what I'm going to do is just pull it out. Now, this is not going to eventually be completely a horizontal image. The client wants it as a vertical, but I've made my background mask horizontal because I like to give them the option of having a horizontal version as well. So I don't want to then have to go back and rebuild another background. So I want to pull this out so that it ends up being a nice image size as a horizontal. So I'm just going to pull that all the way out so that we've got lots of space, so that when I crop, that should work. Now, that looks pretty not fantastic at the moment, but just wait. It's actually, I don't mind it, but you can't see the background and he looks like he's floating. So that blend mode currently is normal. So if we change our blend modes, it's going to change the way the background looks. So here's our layer. Up here determines how that layer is blended in with all the other layers. So I can have a look down. I can use dissolve, which does nothing. I can do darken, which isn't fantastic. I can try multiply. That doesn't work. Color burn doesn't work either. Darken color. So none of that group are any good. I can try lighten. Not bad. Screen. All right. Screen starts to look all right. Or overlay. Overlay, not so good. So I usually use screen. And what I do is, if the smoke is not enough, I simply duplicate the layer maybe once or twice to bring up some more depth in the shot. So if I do 3, suddenly we're getting a better look. And then what I'll do is I'll merge those layers together. So I'm going to go down and merge layers. So that's just the layers that I've selected. And now I've got like a nice solid smoky background. Go back to screen. All right, and then I'm just going to tweak the opacity and blend it in a little bit so it's not looking as over the top. All right, so we've got a bit of a smoky background going on. The other thing I can try is change the blend mode to normal and just reduce the opacity. And that tends to give you more texture, but I don't think it looks as real, so I'm going to go back to screen. All right, and just reducing the opacity there. So that's that. So the reason it's not looking as good as it should is because so let's just have a look at there's before, there's after. We can probably go a little bit softer. So it's just a little bit of atmos. It's not like you'd be sitting in a completely smoky room. It's not working. I'm not selling the shot because the front and the throne and the king are still too clean. So what I'm going to do now is duplicate this smoke layer and put it over the king, and that's going to help. So there's my layer copy. I'm just going to name these so we know what everything is. So we've got smoke and smoke 2. Alright, so this layer is still behind the throne and the king. So what I'm going to do now is move this layer so that it is actually on top. There we go. So now I've got smoke over the king, and I can duplicate that, make it a bit darker, and now that's looking pretty cool. And what I need to do now is merge these two layers. So I've got the smoke there, and that's looking quite good. I might even go again for the front. That's looking great now. Merge these layers. Merge layers. So there we go. All right. So the problem is it's a little bit too too smoky now. So what I want to do is just reduce the amount of smoke on the king. So I'm going to knock back the opacity a little bit so it's not quite as smoky. So something about there, maybe. I think I'll go about there. All right. And now what I want to do is get my eraser and just make sure that I've got a very soft brush, large brush, fairly soft. And what I'm going to do, and I've got my opacity set quite low, and we'll knock the flow back as well. And what I'm going to do now is just sort of brush little areas so that we can see that the smoke isn't completely covering him. And I'm just doing that really softly. So again, there's 1,000 different ways that you can do this. And it's important that you've got a soft brush because you don't want to sort of show off the trail. And just make sure that his face is nice and clean, otherwise the client isn't going to be happy. And make sure you see his boots. Let's have a look now. So there's before, there's after, and the background. And we now will just knock that back a little bit more. Okay. Alright, so I've tweaked around a little bit. I've added another curves adjustment layer to the king. So that's before, that's after, so just making him a bit grittier. And I've also added one to the chair just to pick up a bit of the shine there. And the next thing I want to do is, I think his sword is looking a bit too bright. So what I'm going to do is add a dodge burn layer to there. So out of my skin retouch pack, I've got my dodge burn layer. I'm going to put one there. And again, I just want the dodge and burn to affect this layer here. So Alt and click, and you can see that little arrow there that's pointing down. That means that this layer, what I do to this, will only affect this, like the king. So what I want to do now is basically just with a little brush, a little soft brush. So make it as soft as possible, and reduce the opacity so I'm not getting a build up too quickly, and also reduce the flow. I'm just going to come in and brush over that and just make that a bit darker. So I just bring up the opacity a bit more, and you can see that that's just building that up nicely, and that helps sell the shot. So I'm just like burning that in, and I might just get a bigger brush and just burn in around there, hands over that. So let's have a look. So there's before, there's after. It's subtle, but it helps sell the shot. Burn his feet as well. And probably one thing that I should have done is just retouched the paint off his so we'll just take the smoke off so I can see what I'm doing. I'm just going to clean up this area here, so I'll just do that on a little empty layer and just come in with the clone tool, reduce the opacity. It's quite involved, these retouch jobs, and just come in and clone over the top of that. So I'll stop the video because this is kind of boring to watch. Alright, so the last few things I want to do in Photoshop is I just want to change a few of the colours around, just slightly, just add some tone in there. So the first thing I want to do is just add a bit of a bluish tone to the background and to the smoke, just a subtle one. So I'm under the throne, so in the background. So I'm going to go to New Adjustment Layer, and again I'm going to go to Curves. This time I'm going to just do the blue channel, and I'm just going to tweak. So if I go that way, I get green. If I go up, I get a little bit of blue. And so I just want to give like a slight bluish haze to the smoke. So there's before, there's after, very subtle, and then I can reduce the opacity a little bit. So there's before, there's after. It's subtle, but I like it. And then I want to do the same. I want to make the throne a little bit more golden. So I'm going to go to my throne layer, just above the curve there, and go to curves. And I'm going to actually scrap that. I'm going to add a photo filter to that, and that's a warming filter, and that's going over everything underneath. So I'm going to again just make sure that it just affects the throne layer. So I'm just holding down Alt, and just on the line in between the two curves, you can see that arrow there, click, and now what I do is only affecting the throne, and now I've made it a more golden color, and that looks lovely. And I can increase that, I can make it super gold. And I just want to warm it up, so that's without anything. So I just want to go to about there, so it looks a bit more bronzy rather than the silver that it was. So I think that's looking quite good. So there's before, there's after. So I've warmed it up. You can probably knock it back a little bit there. Before, after, and that's looking pretty good. So once I'm happy with that, there's a couple of other little tweaks, and I like to actually do the final few steps in Lightroom just to finish it off, just to darken the floor, add a little bit of a gradient. So what I'm going to do is save all of that, and I'll head into Lightroom. All right, so I've got my image now into Lightroom, and this is where I just do some little finishing touches just to sell the shot and make it look a bit more realistic. So the first thing I want to address is the fact that I still feel like it's floating. Probably could have done these little tweaks in Photoshop, but it's just as easy to do it in Lightroom. So what I want to do is just bring up my graduated filter, and I'm going to apply a filter to the bottom. It's right just up to about his knees. And I'll turn on the overlay so you can see that I'm just going to be hitting this area. I've got it to the exposure up, so I'm going to just reduce my exposure. I'll turn the overlay off so you should be able to see that it's just getting a little bit darker, and that's now sort of selling. It's sort of starting to make more sense, and I can tweak that a little bit higher if I want to, or bring it down a little bit lower, but I think about there looks right, and that makes sense that that's where the fall off would be. The other thing that's and now what I can do is I can actually remove areas of the marquee. So what I've done is I've added a whole band of like a darker area across the bottom, but I now want to pick up a bit more detail in through here because I think it's done overall a little bit too much. So I can, while I've got my marquee selected, if I click on the brush tool, okay, and so when you bring up the brush tool, you can see there's a little plus in the middle there. If I hit option now, it becomes a minus, okay, and now these are my settings for my brush. If I hold down the option alt on a PC, I've got a minus, which is now an eraser, but the flow is set to 100, so that's probably too much. I'm going to keep my feather so let's have a look. So there's my flow, bring my feather up so it's nice and soft, and bring my flow down. So it's just like little gradual, and with a little soft brush now, I'll go a little bit lower. I can now just come in and give it a little tickle in some places and bring back some detail, which is great. And what's fantastic about these is you can build on that. So let's have a look. So we got before, after, and suddenly that's now sitting really nicely. I'm quite happy with that. What I don't like is we've just picked up a bit of detail, too much color here when we went darker. So what I might do is just go back to my brush setting, clear everything off, and just get a bit of just desat a little bit. Soft brush, flow, density down, bring my feather up, and I'm just going to just give it a little bit of a desat to these areas, just slightly, so it loses some of that, I don't know, it's just looking a bit fakey in here. So, and I'll show you, I'm just applying it to a couple of areas there, and all I'm doing is desaturating. So if we turn it off, it's subtle, but it just takes away some of that super goldness that got picked up when I darkened the bottom off. The other thing I don't like is I can just see the back of the chair. It doesn't make sense that underneath the chair would not be bright like that. So again, it's just like troubleshooting now and just finding little things that don't quite work. So I'm going to get a new brush, and I'm going to lower the exposure, make sure my saturation is back, and I will maybe drop the shadows, and I'll just come in nice and tight, and we'll just go to, where are we? There's his feet. Just this gold part in here. So bring my brush up, and I'm just going to brush in here, turn up my flow, so, and I'm just brushing in here. And once I've masked the area and I'm happy with it, I can go back to fill and I can see where I'm at, turn off the, so that's that red area that I'm doing, and then I can, and you can see that that's just removing, and I can also drop my highlights, that's going to help, and drop my shadows. So let's have a look. So we've got before, after, before, after. Just bring up the density as well. And alright, and if I want to go again, I can actually just duplicate that layer and see if I can get a bit more, a bit darker in there, and maybe I will just reduce the feather a little bit. Just do in here, give that a little tickle. Some of the edge of his jacket there. So that's where I've done. So again, before, after, and they're just little subtle additions, but that just kind of helps sell the shot. Just make sure that spear's a little bit darker. All right, then overall, I think it's still looking a little bit bright. I like my shots a bit moody, so I'm just going to drop the exposure overall and open up my shadows a fraction. And because I love to, I'm just going to bring in a little bit more clarity there. So there we go, before, after, and that's now starting to look a lot more finished. Alright, and now just to finish it off, I just might put a little spotlight there in the middle, so I just make sure that that's selected just on the king there. So I just like give him a little bit of dook there, just a little spot to make him well and truly the hero, and even just warm it up a fraction. Alright, before, after. It's not a lot, it's subtle. And I'm going to get a new brush, and I think it's looking a little bit heavy now at the bottom, so I'm just going to give that all a little bit of a tickle in here. So with a brush, sorry. So new brush, let's have a go. Just give his shoes a bit in here, a bit there. Just on the top of the shoes. So before, after, that's looking better. And just play with the sliders. Happy with that. And if I'm going to be, while I'm here, I may as well, I think I'll just darken the edge of the chair a little bit. And maybe just bring a little bit of clarity into there. There we go. just to make it all stand out a little bit more. So we got before, after, just brought that down a little bit, and I'm pretty happy with that. So there you go. There's the Game of Thrones retouch. Thanks, guys.